Great, thank you very much. I believe there's going to be one of my images that will be displayed right now.
Yes.
So I could start my talk if that could happen, and then we can get into it. In fact, while they're getting that up, I would like to say thank you so much to Florent for taking a bet on me before anybody really. He was the first person who published me for a previous book, and you know, he's always somebody who I just felt, you know, he thought outside of the box. And I always remember thinking, if I could have my book released by anybody in France, it would be by Francois Maspero, who was a big hero of mine, who sadly passed away, I believe, in 2017. But he was the spirit with which Maspero published the kind of make things happen. You know, of course, he published Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, you know, when it was very dangerous to publish that book. I'm not describing my book as in the same arena as that book, of course, but for me, Florent is from a similar kind of tradition of publisher, somebody who takes chances, you know. So I'm very proud to be published by Florent. And I'd, you know, also like to thank Antonio for his very interesting introduction, and it's a real honor to be here. And you know, as he was speaking, I was thinking of a quote at the beginning of a book by Hanif Qureshi, the Buddha of Suburbia, in which he begins, "I was born and raised an Englishman, almost." You know, and I feel like that about my role in Europe. I was born and raised a European, almost, and that of course is connected to my blackness, but also my Britishness. So you know, thank you everybody. I would also like to say that, you know, we talk about cancel culture, which can be problematic, but also, you know, we have to remember that perhaps in the past, Europe and European culture has been the biggest cancel culture of all, and in fact it cancelled the very culture that I was wanting to write about. The reason I wanted to write about this book is because my culture had been cancelled by European hegemony. So it's important to remember that as we were talking about cancel culture in 2021. Is the photograph ready?
Yeah, I think we can broadcast it. Yeah. Do you see the photograph? Yeah, it's online.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, great.
Oh.
So
I think you don't see the photo, but it's online. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'd like to, you know, begin by expressing my deep gratitude to the Veillon Foundation for this award. You know, the photograph you can see there is a self-portrait I took on my way home, speeding through a wintry Lausanne after 6 months of traveling to make this book, Afropean. I had no idea then whether or not I could even get this book published, much less honored with such a prestigious award. But I do remember in the moment that I took that photo, a feeling of contentment that I had given everything that I could to the journey. So it's a beautiful bit of synchronicity to receive a prize that emerges from the city of Lausanne, a city I've never visited, only passed through, which nonetheless holds a special place in my imagination when thinking of this Afropean work. And I look forward to visiting Lausanne as soon as travel restrictions are lifted. I'm also incredibly honoured and humbled to learn that my book is held in such esteemed company. Amin Malouf's Les Identités Meurtrières is a past winner of the European Essay Prize, as has been mentioned, and it is a huge inspiration to Afropean. I found it as I was nearing the end of my first draft, randomly stumbling upon it one evening on a desk in the offices where I worked, on a night shift, the only person in the office except for Nigerian security guards and Nepalese cleaners. I read it all that evening, bought my own copy the next day and read it again, and its wisdom elevated my first draft and inspired me to such an extent that I chose to begin my book with a passage from it. And I'd like to read that passage now. They live in a sort of frontier zone crisscrossed by ethnic, religious, and other fault lines. But by virtue of this situation, peculiar rather than privileged, they have a special role to play in forging links, eliminating misunderstandings, making some parties more reasonable and others less belligerent. And that's precisely why their dilemma is so significant. If they themselves cannot sustain their multiple allegiances, If they're continually pressed to take sides, then all of us have reason to be uneasy about the way the world is going. It struck me how prescient those words were published in 1998, 3 years before September the 11th. How poignant those words are, reading them in 2021, in a world that has perhaps landed exactly where Malouf feared it would, if we didn't heed his warning. I'm especially interested in works from this period, the last decade of the 20th century, a 20th century that we remain haunted by. And this includes work by people such as Marc Augier with his work Non-Places, and Pico Iyer with his text Global Soul. There were people who recognised the inherent contradictions at work in a globalised world, who were fighting for the world to come together, but questioning, perhaps, neoliberal capitalism, the system under which globalisation was working. The 21st century was up for grabs, and they all knew it. By the time my generation came of age, the cracks were impossible to ignore, and the series of crises in the West, from 9/11 to the global financial crash in 1998, and the energies unleashed in the form of Brexit and Trump in 2016. 6 months after the Twin Towers collapsed, and I want to speak from a UK context here, I hope that's okay, the BBC broadcast a special programme entitled Strange New World, in which the host, a fresh-faced journalist called Andrew Marr, posited that big changes are underway in our increasingly globalised world. But where are they leading us? And are we getting globalisation right? The lineup of guests on that show in 2001 included, we were told, a diverse group of people from across the political spectrum, including George W. Bush's Assistant for Economic Policy, Larry Lindsay, the radical Peruvian economist, Hernando de Soto, and liberal philanthropist, George Soros. Across the political spectrum was a stretch. It was obvious straight away that everybody invited to take part in the discussion was invested in neoliberal capitalism as, to quote Marr again, a new global agenda that links plausibly together the West and the rest. This became most apparent when, in the televised discussion, Lindsay defended the US response to 9/11, saying that the attack was not just an attack on America, but an attack on the world. He said the World Trade Center that was attacked, only in America could this have happened. That was part of what united us. The World Trade Center, a symbol of a unified world, really? Or more a symbol of Western imperialism and economic dominance? The group of people around that table were indicative of the fact that after the fall of communism in the late 1980s, the world was left with no alternative way to imagine itself coming together. The Soviet notion of international friendship was dead. Globalization under capitalist terms thrived in what American economist Francis Fukuyama famously described as in 1998 as the end of history. That is, the model of Western liberal democracy under capitalism was the only surviving viable system under which governments of the future could realistically operate. The winners in the free market came together, and the world was given a multicultural veneer. Executives from Dubai, Nigeria, Delhi, and the US could hold a meeting in the VIP business lounge at Narita Airport and pat themselves on the back as evidence of a new global world. But the trickle-down effect has not happened in the way imagined, and the gulf between rich and poor has only widened. As diversity and multiculturalism have been staged by the system, everyday convivial multiculturalism at street level has been repeatedly undermined by those in power. Everybody from Nicolas Sarkozy, who denigrated those rioting in the French suburbs after 2 young boys were chased to their death by police as scumbags, to Angela Merkel, who went on record to say multiculturalism in Germany had failed spectacularly, to David Cameron, who claimed Britain had been too tolerant towards Muslims and that multiculturalism had failed, to David Blunkett, the local MP for my constituency in Sheffield during the Blair years, who, during his time as Home Secretary, stated that Britain was being swamped by asylum seekers. All of these people are on record denigrating multiculturalism on the one hand, while backing the agenda of globalization on the other. We saw this at play acutely in the UK under the new Labour government eerily similar to Macron's En Marche in France. The organic ways in which people came together and produced art and music in the 1980s and 1990s, outside and in the wake of Margaret Thatcher, had been crushed by the 2000s. When Thatcher was in power, there was a common enemy, a clear racist, someone who called Nelson Mandela a terrorist and crushed the industrial foundations of the working class North. Against the backdrop of Thatcherism, and indeed a focused reaction against it, you had movements such as Rock Against Racism that saw Rastas, skinheads and punks join forces to fight against an emboldened national front, and politically conscious bands such as UB40, The Specials and X-Ray Specs, whose fusion was encoded not only in their music, but their multi-ethnic band members. All of this and the type of working class intellectuals given airtime with Arthur Scargill during the miners' strike was largely absent in the mainstream during the sanitised Blair era, with its nationalistic Britpop hinged around white men on the one hand and ghetto fabulous hip-hop formulated by black men with capitalist dreams on the other. The type of messy multiculturalism of the jungle and drum and bass scenes, natural airs of ska and punk, the graffiti scene and pirate radio stations all gave way to commodified and formalised versions of themselves. The designer clothes of UK Garage, a new BBC station called One Extra signed up all of London's most respected pirate radio DJs and neutered them with its official BBC values. Street culture was absorbed into the cultural industries, and people used terms from the world of business like investment in people instead of talking about their dreams for empowering a proletariat. Graffiti artists were put in jail for years for vandalism, while a kind of corporate vandalism was promoted. McDonald's using graffiti fonts to sell their burgers, hip-hop and spoken word used to sell Halifax mortgages and so on. I'm speaking specifically here of the UK, of course, but only because of how it fits into a global agenda across the West, trying to think of new ways to continue the 20th century projects of imperialism and hegemony in all but name, and drag them and rebrand them for the 21st century. The British sociologist Paul Gilroy has a telling personal anecdote for what happened during this era. He left to teach in the United States just before New Labour came into power. And by the time he'd returned in the early noughties, all of his old comrades from the left suddenly became management consultants. Those working closely with the community as youth workers and community leaders were assimilated into a system that ultimately divorced them from the community they were supposed to be serving. As a working class aspiring writer and photographer from Sheffield, I remember how anybody could afford to maintain creative integrity. Anybody who could afford, to maintain creative integrity began selling out even before they had anything to sell. As the late cultural theorist Mark Fisher wrote, only prisoners have time to read. And if you want to engage in a 20-year-long research project funded by the state, you'll have to kill someone. The need to escape the Blair Project and its aftermath, a London of millionaire tax exiles and impossible rents, Britain's streets bereft of anything bohemian, was the reason I needed to escape the UK and think of a way to sustain my multiple allegiances by reaching out to build something trans-local among working class and black communities, living multiculturalism at street level in their everyday lives rather than in these corporate non-places. This motivated me to set up an online, multimedia, multidisciplinary journal exploring Black lives in Europe, to celebrate the nuances and sometimes contradictory blurs that exist outside of official national narratives. The landscape, perhaps as psychic as it is geographic, is a space where creativity and art can and should flourish. If society is interested in, as Mars said in that documentary, getting globalization right, we need to face our strange new world with a mixture of openness, optimism, curiosity, humility, and kindness. With its avant-garde and passion for originality, art and literature can play a pivotal role in helping us move forwards. Its power to drive a new narrative is what made it so attractive to political regimes, from the Bolsheviks to the Nazis to New Labour. But as the ongoing Freelands Foundation and Runnymede Trust report into racial inequality shows, the arts, and particularly the visual arts, remain shamefully undiverse, white and middle class, both in terms of practitioners and in terms of audience. They know that in 2017, the Department for Education recorded that children in UK schools, of whom 31% were categorised as minority ethnic, were introduced to visual art by teachers who were 94% white, and that only 2.7% of the workforce in the visual arts come from a BME background. A recent report on the state of publishing in the UK said that 98% of all commissioning editors were white, and let's be honest, probably not working class. This is not to even mention France, where the somewhat oblivious belief in an inviolable égalité makes gathering this kind of statistic almost impossible. Clearly, this needs to change. Art and literature needs to be more than a financial commodity to play its full role in society and in all of our lives. For this, we need practitioners who place ideas and community at the heart of their practice, who've managed to wriggle free from buzzwords and quotas and produce at the periphery and place the periphery at the centre. That is diversity done the right way around, a strange new world that we can all believe in. Thank you.